As the U.S. Middle East envoy for the U.S. Trump administration, Jason Greenblatt is seen as the chief architect of the 2020 peace deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, known as the Abraham Accords. On the sidelines of the WION Global Summit in Dubai, TRT World spoke to Jason Greenblatt about what the Abraham Accords has brought to the region and what the path ahead looks like.
Jason Greenblatt, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
The UAE have signed a historic agreement with Israel normalizing relations, the so-called Abraham Accords, which you, as the former White House Middle East envoy to President Trump, played an integral part in putting together. How and when did this process start?
Well, it took several years. I mean, obviously the race to get it signed ended up, unfortunately for me, happening after I left. As I like to say, I helped design the stadium and build the stadium and grow the grass and kick the ball partly down the field, but I didn't get to kick the goal. But it took years. It was years of hard work on all sides. It was years of sort of what we tried to do with the Palestinian leadership, which was re-educating, talking honestly, openly, tackling difficult topics, and not constantly just using the talking points that were used in the past that were unlikely to ever yield peace. And I give the leadership here in the United Arab Emirates, and of course Bibi Netanyahu and President Trump and all of their teams, tremendous credit for what they did.
The Palestinians and the Palestinian leadership have unsurprisingly rejected this agreement, have rejected the Abraham Accords. In fact, they speak of a betrayal. Do they have a point?
Well, they use the word betrayal, you're right, and I would argue the opposite, which is that the Palestinian leadership has completely betrayed its people. The leadership in Gaza, Hamas, the Iran-funded terrorist thugs who cause 2 million Palestinians to suffer year after year after year, and the leadership in Ramallah, who uses money, aid from all countries, including very substantial aid from the United Arab Emirates. They misuse those funds. I have had so many Emirati friends tell me that the area where the Palestinians live, I don't call it Palestine, others do, with all the money that they've gotten over the decades, it should look like Singapore today without a peace agreement. Where did all that money go? So I would say that the UAE and the others who signed the accords, and hopefully others who will sign the accords, didn't betray the Palestinians. The leadership of the Palestinians betrayed the Palestinians. Furthermore, the leadership here in the UAE and others, it's their responsibility to protect UAE citizens, Bahraini citizens. That's their job. They're not abandoning the Palestinians. They still very much strongly support the Palestinians. But their first and foremost priority is their own people, their own national interests, and that's what they did.
What do you think was the prime motivation for the Gulf states and the UAE in particular to sign and pursue this accord with Israel?
I think if you ask different people, you'll hear different things. You'll hear one thing from Bibi Netanyahu, you'll hear another thing from the leadership in the UAE, you might hear something different from the Americans. So I try not to focus on those political discussions. I really just focus on the results. And the results are, I've traveled to the region so many times now since I left the White House at the end of October in 2019, and certainly since the Abraham Accords were announced. And it's just remarkable. The fact that I sit here, walk around in the UAE with my kippah on and feel warm and welcome. Occasionally they mistake me for an Israeli. They say shalom. But it's just such a different place. And you're talking to somebody who spent a great deal of time here during the 3 years I was at the White House. I was always made to feel welcome, but there's a difference between being warm and welcome to a diplomat who's here and just a private citizen walking around. And I'm just so proud of everything that everybody has done on this.
As a former White House Middle East envoy to President Trump, do you think he has received sufficient credit, he has gotten sufficient credit for making this deal?
I think that those who are intellectually honest fully recognize the major historical achievement that he did under his administration. Those that don't, I don't really pay attention to. Those that say it was an accident or, we all knew it was happening and he sort of took the credit for something that happened before, that's not honest. And he deserves every bit of credit, as does His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and the King of Bahrain and the Prime Minister of Israel and so many others who worked on this.
The UAE was the first, but other countries have followed suit. Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan have all started to normalize relations, formalize relations with Israel after the peace accord, after the Abraham Accords were signed. Now, of course, the big question is whether Saudi Arabia could be next. What do you think?
I think everything is in the cards. I don't know when and if Saudi will do it. I think we need to give Saudi Arabia the space that it needs to determine if and when they should do it. I definitely feel when I'm in Saudi Arabia among my friends, my Saudi friends, the discussion also has dramatically changed there. Comments such as when they see an El Al plane flying from Israel to the UAE, they say, inshallah, soon to Riyadh. Those are conversations I didn't have in 2017. Will they be ready? I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of it, but I think what we should also celebrate are the victories. Saudi Arabia has largely supported the Abraham Accords. They're allowing certain aircraft to fly over their airspace, Israeli aircraft or others flying to and from Israel. Each of those is a win, and I'm proud of the Saudi leadership for being supportive of this and being open-minded enough to try to support the Abraham Accords. And you know, one day I deeply hope that they do join it.
You recently tweeted, and I quote, "Saudi Arabia is a critical ally of the USA and vital to the security and stability of the Middle East. To suggest or behave otherwise is a big mistake." Do you think that the current US administration, do you think that President Biden sees it the same way?
Well, he says, President Biden says he agrees. He does say Saudi's an ally, although during his campaign he said he would treat either Saudi Arabia or Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I forget which, as the pariah that it is. It's very hard to tell. I think that his behavior towards Saudi Arabia is not the way it should be. I wrote an op-ed in Newsweek saying exactly that. I think we need to treat Saudi Arabia for the important power that it is in the region. It's a critical ally to the United States. It's critical to the stability and security of the region. Lip service and saying that Saudi Arabia can defend itself without actually helping Saudi with its problem now in Yemen with the Houthi missiles, the terrorist Houthi missiles. I think it was a mistake to remove the designation terrorist from the Houthis. That is an example of mistreating Saudi Arabia. Yes, we all agree the tragedy in Yemen has to be resolved. That's one conversation. The other conversation is how do we support our friend and ally Saudi Arabia to make sure that they can keep their citizens safe. I was on an airplane in the Riyadh airport with my son. We were going to fly to Jeddah. Our flight was delayed. Why? Because there were missiles being thrown by the Houthis towards Saudi Arabia. What do you think any country would do if that happened? If I was at the airport, at John F. Kennedy Airport, right, and a missile was coming, do you think any president would tolerate that? I think we need to allow Saudi the space that it needs to defend itself.
Well, the UAE and Israel certainly made history by signing the peace deal and normalizing relations. Do you think that this agreement has changed the dynamics of this region irreversibly?
I do think that. I think irrespective of what happens with the Iranian regime, things may slow down if that goes in the wrong direction. By wrong direction, I mean if the Biden administration caves to the Iranian regime and causes all sorts of problems, things may slow down. But I think it is not only irreversible, I think that it would be terrible for the entire region if if the brakes are put on the Abraham Accords or if somebody tried to reverse it. I think people are excited about it. Think of all, there's danger now. There's COVID, there's Iran, that's true. But think of all the positive things that are happening. You have Vision 2030, Dubai just announced a Vision 2040. You have young Emiratis, Saudis, everybody in the region, Qataris. Everybody's looking toward a future of promise and of prosperity. They're excited about working together. So I don't think it's not only in anybody's interest, I think people will be terribly disappointed if things like the Abraham Accords and the many benefits are not part and parcel of the future for the young people in the region.
Jason Greenblatt, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.